Hi, everyone, and welcome to Open Class with Laura. Laura, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
For those of you who don't know Laura, she was a guest previously and talked about, her own journey and her own story. So very thankful for that and for you joining today. So with that said, let's just jump into it and answer some questions. And as always, nothing is medical advice, just general thoughts and general tips that can help anyone. So let me share my screen here and I'll read the first out of three questions. So the first one is from, where is it? All the way up at the top. Sorry, I scrolled a little. Okay, here, from Sophie. Hi, Daniel. I've been following you for a while and applying all techniques to help my sleep. For the last few weeks, my sleep has improved, but the last 2 nights have been sleepless and distressing. I'm suffering from depression due to probably perimenopause, some changes in life. And so trying to befriend wakefulness is so difficult. When I can't sleep, all the depressive thoughts return and I'm in a flood of tears. Because of this, getting back to sleep is so hard. My depression fuels my insomnia. Insomnia fuels my depression. I'm so tired and upset in the day, desperate for sleep. I'm finding it difficult to cope. I'm worried I'm going to make myself ill. How should I try to tackle this? I'm not currently on antidepressants, but thinking maybe I need some antidepressant medication to help with anxiety, negative thoughts, which would help with sleep. Any help would be grateful. Thanks in advance, Sophie. So thanks for submitting this, Sophie. And, again, nothing is medical advice here, but I want to share some thoughts here and then ask you what you think, Laura. But one of the things that we read early here was like, I've been deploying these techniques and they kind of help, but now they're not helping. And that I find, I recognize that sort of thought pattern, which is like, okay, if I do this, then I will sleep. So it can be something like, okay, if I get up at this time and if I go to bed late, I'm going to make myself sleepy and I'm going to sleep. And it can seem like, oh yeah, it kind of worked because you sleep in the beginning. But that's really mostly because like you have some confidence that this will help, or you feel like, oh, I'm doing something kind of like that. But then when that initial kind of like sense of like, okay, the confidence in this, whatever, is kind of like questioned, then you're not sleeping again just because of the worry and hyperarousal. And it seems like, oh no, this technique stopped working. But it's just that you're using something that is like a technique to make yourself sleep that is tricky there. That was the first thing that came to my mind. But Laura, what are your thoughts when you hear this?
Yeah, I remember after first starting your program and being introduced to your work, having, inverted commas, success, where I had a couple of nights where it was a bit easier. And it was actually more sometimes distressing to have the nights where there was higher hyperarousal. And that could have been just related to like the day's events, just stressful events. And then that sort of impacting on your sleep because you were kind of like, oh, well, I was doing this thing and it was working. But I think, as you say, like sleep for people who don't have trouble with it is like effortless. So as soon as you start trying to apply a technique, there's an approach, but it's not like a set of like, steps, because then it's exactly the same as like, oh, I'm going to do yoga before bed so I'm relaxed. And I actually remember before coming across your work, having a night where I tried to do all these relaxing things in order to sleep. And because I was trying so hard, it didn't actually work.
100%. Yeah, well said. And, the other thing that came to my mind here was you, Laura, you're very familiar with this concept of like befriending wakefulness. Like we think that being awake is somehow, the brain thinks that being awake is somehow like a threat, dangerous. And then my teaching is often like, okay, kind of befriend it, do something you like to do when you're awake. But that can be very tricky because sometimes you're tired, you're like, you're anxious, how can you do something you enjoy in the middle of the night when you feel that way? But, kind of my answer to that and how you can meet that to me is like, you don't have to do something that you enjoy. It's not like you have to be like super, engaged in something fun at night, but anything you do that is not trying to make yourself sleep is actually just teaching the brain that you're still safe. So you can be like, yes, I have all these feelings, all these thoughts, I'm tired and I'm awake and I don't want to be awake now, but I'm still safe, and I can still, be in this moment without trying to escape being awake and just be present in that moment. That is also teaching the brain that, that's also a way of befriending wakefulness, which is a little bit easier than, doing something that's fun, But so that was another thing I thought about. What are your thoughts on that one, Laura?
Well, I actually did some assignments at that time of night. I actually lived with a housemate who previously to this used to have trouble sleeping, and she wasn't so worried about it because she's like, oh, I just swapped my life around. She realized she wasn't actually working full time, so she could do that a little bit. But so we're not like really complex assignments, but stuff. I was studying horticulture at the time, and so I would sometimes do assignments. But I was really lucky for me because I used to be a big reader as a kid and stopped kind of reading, picked it up during lockdown, and then it was just really great in the night because I was like, oh, I've got all this time to read, and that was something that I really enjoyed. So it was quite easy to befriend wakefulness because I was like, oh, now I just have all this time to myself to read. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily, I guess, have to be something that you enjoy, but that does make it easier.
100%. So you just like waiting for sleep to happen, because that when waiting for anything to happen, it just takes so much time. And I just, before we go to like the next question, I just want to say to Sophie here, like, again, talk to your doctor, whoever, when you're concerned about your health and all that. But my thinking on this is that, people often ask like, I have both insomnia and anxiety. Like, it's like, do I have to not be anxious so that I can sleep, or I feel depressed? And to me, it's like they all, to me, really come from the same place, a place of like, there's some type of discomfort within us, something we don't want to experience. And then the more we're like, I can't feel this way, I don't want to feel this way, I have to get out of this, then it takes us to like that place of like, we struggle more with whatever it is. So I think whatever you learn about sleep and insomnia, it helps with that, but it can help with everything else too. So those are just some comments on that. So hang in there, Sophie, and let us know if there are follow-up questions. Next one is a very short question here. Which is from Linda. She says, any books recommended for sleep-related anxiety? And what do you think, Laura?
Daniel's book, Set It and Forget It. That was like a key book for me. But I also think I mentioned this on my last podcast, Claire Weeks. She's she's passed away now. She's an older Australian doctor, and she's got some very sort of old school self-help books on anxiety, which really speaks to what you were just saying, Daniel, which is actually about turning towards anxiety and actually letting yourself experience it, because by doing that, you're actually teaching your brain that there's nothing to be afraid of. And when I was feeling really anxious and sleep-related anxious, I used to just like lay not at nighttime, but in the middle of the day, whenever I was feeling it, I'd lay under my weighted blanket and just like let myself feel as anxious as possible. And after a while, it does pass. It feels really weird that would happen, but in my experience, if you're just like, yep, okay, I'm going to let this experience, and you're in a safe space while you're doing it, it does pass, because your brain's like, well, you're letting me feel this fear, then it must not really be a thing. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but Claire Weeks, she actually had experiences of anxiety, and I think her work really relates to sleep as well.
Yeah, I think so too. If you pick up, and I think this is how it's spelled, Claire Weeks.
Yeah.
If you pick up her book, then the one thing that like her teachings is amazing. What is this? I put some other banner. Her book is amazing, but there is a little bit like when it comes to medications, it's very old school. Like it's like,
yes,
it's interesting because at that age, it must have been that people didn't want to take anything. So she was like, trust your doctor and make sure they put you on these things, which is that part is a little odd, but everything else is great.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the great stuff is actually if you read about her biography, because she has like a lived experience of anxiety related to what she thought was a heart problem, but it wasn't a heart problem. It was just an accelerated heart rate because of hyperarousal. So I think actually when you read it related to her biography, it's kind of cool.
It's really powerful work. That's great. And what else? Oh, yeah, I want to mention two other ones.
I can't remember what his name is. The English guy.
Guy Meadows.
Yes, yeah. His book was helpful
too. Did you read
but I did. I read all of them. But for me, yours was a little bit more helpful because his was like doing what I was saying, but applying it to nighttime. And that was too sort of overwhelming for me at the time. Whereas yours was like around the sort of timeless sleep window and the, actually doing something at that time that was enjoyable. I found a lot more accessible for me where I was, but it still has some good stuff, I think. Yeah,
same sentiment there. And I would add one last one. This is actually So somebody who reached out to me randomly like a year ago, who had his own struggle with insomnia, wanted to become a sleep coach, and he went through the program and he became a sleep coach. And his name is Joseph Panel, and he's written a book called "You Can Sleep Too." I'm just typing up there for anyone who's interested. Very, very like the easiest read you can imagine, because he's so like throughout his journey, which is like so much struggle, he still finds these things that are very comical. So that can be a nice read for anyone who's interested.
That sounds good. I hadn't come across that one.
Yeah, it just came out like a few months ago, but it's very nice. All right, so last question here is this, again, this is kind of a long email, so we can kind of maybe look at it in pieces or in paragraphs or whatnot, in segments, from Reine. So she said, "Hi Daniel, thanks so much for your content. Anytime. I have a history of onset insomnia for several years now. Usually I would get a bout of it for a few weeks, and then it would get resolved and I'd sleep fine for months, and then the cycle would repeat. When lockdown first started in 2020, I experienced a longer bout of it than usual, and while it was incredibly challenging, it eventually got resolved with CBT-I. Then everything was okay until about April of this year, when I had several stressors in my life coincide with the weight of having been in lockdown alone for a year, started struggling again. The thing is that there were usually I would have trouble falling asleep, but now I started experiencing these weird nights where I would seemingly fall asleep fine, but quote unquote wake up at night, maybe around 3 or 4, and it would feel like I wasn't sure I even been asleep. The only reason why I knew I was asleep was because I know what it feels like to be awake, tossing and turning for 3 to 4 hours. And on these nights, I didn't feel the time go by. I would be able to fall asleep pretty quickly, and after that, I would feel fatigued the next day, despite the fact that, technically speaking, I would have only been awake for about an hour at night." Let's actually pause there. And Laura, did you ever go through like a formal CBT-I program, or you never did that?
Not formally. As I said, I researched so much. So there was, in Australia, there was like an online one that you could do. I think I can't remember the organization that did it, but they released it, obviously because lockdown was causing people to have so many different sort of mental health. And so I did do it, but I found it a bit too rigid for me. Whereas I found your approach a little bit more gentle, I guess that would be. But I do understand the concepts. Yeah.
Yeah, very well. And I think, many people do like CBT-I and do really well afterwards. But I think, to me, honestly, it's a little bit of like a little bit of a gamble, because it's quite rigid, as you say. And often it can be like, you have to do this, and this is, and then you do that, and then you still don't sleep well, and it feels like, oh my gosh, not even this worked for me. And it can be a little tricky like that. So, but anyway, the reason I brought it up was because Reine here said that, I had some trouble sleeping, did CBT-I, and everything was resolved. When I read that, I'm kind of like a little bit like, it gives me pause, to use that word, because whenever somebody says like, I did this and then everything was fixed, it was fine. To me, it's kind of signals that you didn't maybe fully go to a place where you saw where everything came from. It's kind of like, I'm sleeping better, good, let's not touch this, let's go on, which is a little tricky place to be in. But does that resonate, Laura? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. Because it also feels like there would be a concern when it doesn't stop working, because you're like, well, I've done this and I've applied everything, and now I'm not. So I think you could lose a lot of like hope through like that, or you could. Yeah, for me, I had to really sort of understand how my fear of not sleeping was causing me to sleep. And I think if you're just like, oh yeah, it's okay now, there's still that fear there.
Exactly.
And I've had 1 or 2 nights where I've struggled a little bit, and I have felt that fear, but it's been really good because I felt it for about 10, 15 minutes, and I've been in bed and I'm like, oh, and then I'm like, there's this part of me that's like, oh, remember, what you learned from your experience. And I'm just like, right, I'm just going to get up, I'm going to read. And within, I think an hour, I've like found myself, going back to sleep and being fine. So it's like, there's this, you've got this in the back of my mind, even after the initial feeling of fear. Whereas it's not something I'm like, oh, I can't look at this anymore, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm still quite open about it. I don't really have the fear that I had initially of not sleeping.
So well said. Like, you're like, it, if somebody had an episode of any time of like trauma, we can call it some kind of trauma, some really, stressful event in your life, and something reminds you of that, of course there's going to be some fear. And so like if somebody had like an episode of like insomnia, had trouble sleeping for weeks or months, and then never ever had any fear, residual fear, that would be really, really odd and strange. Now in your, what you mentioned was like that fear sometimes that happens, you feel that fear, but like you're like not afraid of the fear, if you will, right?
Yeah,
which is
because I know where it's coming from. Like once you understand it. When you don't understand it, it's terrifying. But when you understand it, you're like, okay, well, I know what I've got here.
Exactly, and that's what I feel in this message, is that there's a little bit of like, when the fear comes, it's like, a little bit of like trying to avoid the fear, and like, okay, things are good now. Let's not touch it. So that was one thing, and we'll maybe get back to that in a second here. But the other thing that we've read so far was this like, not really sure, did I sleep or not sleep? Like I was kind of superficial sleep, what really happened? It was bizarre dreams, all that stuff. Like, did you ever experience that?
Oh, all the time. And actually, once I found out that, I can't remember what the actual term is, but I know it's related to hyperarousal. Is it parainsomnia? Is that the correct word? Where you think you're having
one big part of that is
paradoxical.
Really.
Yeah. And so once I realized that actually I had probably been, like, my brain had been catching up in a way, but I was still on such a high alert that it still felt like it was such a light sleep, and that I could, wake at any moment. That was actually really great for me to realize that, like, no matter how, even though I was really stressed and anxiety, my body was trying to catch more sleep than I thought it was getting. And I had all sorts of weird things. And yeah, when I read your book, I realized that they were all just sort of hyperarousal and anxiety, and, my body was in a sort of fear state. So of course it wasn't going to want me to sleep deeply, but it was still allowing me to get some rest. So like, I had moments where I would feel like I'm falling asleep, and then like I'd have adrenaline in my heart and it would wake me up. I used to feel like I had to go to the bathroom lots of times. Just this sort of, feeling that I was asleep. All sorts of weird kind of body things. And they were very discomforting. And because you'd be like, oh, I'm so close to being asleep, or, but yeah, I was aware that sometimes that the time was passing. And like, for instance, with me, because it was really hot during summer when I had my bad experience, I would have a fan and in my room, and I knew that I was like, must have fallen asleep a bit, because I was sort of aware that I could hear the fan and not hear the fan. Like it wasn't always a constant thing. So it was, a common experience of me that I had.
I'm so glad you're here for this particular question, Laura, because, you said it so well. And the fact that I hope to Reine here, it's like what you described there, Laura, is exactly, I call it hypersleep, because it's like you're sleeping, but it's infused with this hyper arousal. So again, super, super common, nothing strange or unusual, but it can see, like, a lot of people ask me, like, I think there's a problem with the type of sleep I have. I'm not even sure if this is insomnia. It's something problem with the type of sleep I have, but again, super common, nothing strange or unusual. So, and again, like when the hyperarousal fades, like these experiences fade. So, okay, cool. Let's continue reading. So Reine said, actually, I worked with you through BedTyme, actually, like you did, Laura, and deleted it several weeks ago as I was feeling I was improved. And as you can see, I highlighted some things here. I wanted to fully forget about it and move forward. I went to France to visit my family in May and had about 3 weeks of great sleep, to the point I felt like I could stop thinking about it. But the moment I came back to my quarantine in Canada, I started struggling again. At the moment, I'm experiencing a mixed bag of these weird nights. Nights of regular onset insomnia, nights of perfectly good sleep, just very inconsistent. I think what's been stopping me from totally accepting and forgetting about it all is that the voice in my head that tells me maybe I'm waking up at night because of sleep apnea. I haven't been diagnosed with it, but the fear of it keeps my mind on the subject. I thought maybe if I can do a home sleep test and prove to myself that I don't have it, I could fully embrace insomnia and let it run its course. But even just doing the test gives me insomnia because I feel monitored and plugged up, and it puts so much pressure on me to get the right results. Right now, I feel a little lost in terms of how to approach this. On one hand, I want to throw in the towel and just stop thinking about it altogether and accept each night as it comes. But then I also find that hard to do when I feel like I'm not hearing tons of people in the insomnia community experiencing these kind of weird nights. I'm hearing about those who wake up at night and can't fall back asleep, or those with paradoxical insomnia, which kind of sounds like what I experienced on those nights, except they say that they don't feel tired at all following the day, and I do. I'm struggling to feel reassured that I'm only experiencing insomnia. If I knew that that's all it was, I think it would have I wouldn't have so much of an issue. It's the voice telling me you're not hearing about people like you, maybe you're different, but then doing the sleep test and researching, trying to find the answer feels like it's making everything worse because it gives it so much attention. I don't know what approach to take anymore. Do I keep trying to do the sleep test despite the fact that it makes sleep even more difficult? Do I abandon all of it and just forget it? Feel caught in between the set it and forget it phase. Okay, that was the entire message. And, I want to just comment on sort of what's been maybe a theme here with the message from Reine, which was that what I highlighted there, like I wanted to forget about it and I thought I could stop thinking about it, which is kind of like, to me, it's one of those paradoxes. When we don't think about it, it can seem like, yes, I managed not to think about it. But in fact, we had no control over that. It was more that education and things that naturally led to a place of not thinking. But anyway, I'm kind of like all over the place. But Laura, thoughts about that part, the highlighted part there?
Well, I just wanted to say the great thing is that you know that you can sleep because you've had these experiences when you've been in France, and that is like kind of reassuring because for me, once I found out that, because my insomnia started after my wisdom teeth surgery, and I was so, and it was after high level anxiety, and I actually remember Googling like, wisdom teeth surgery, does it cause insomnia? Was there something about the surgical procedure that like affected my brain? And there was so much anxiety. And I also remember like the nights where I wouldn't sleep, even if I had sleeping tablets, was when I had like a question mark in my head. So like, oh, should I take it? Shouldn't I? Oh, I'll just lie here. No, I won't take it when I was using sleep medication. And it's actually the ambivalence and the question and the worry about like, is it something else? Is it something external? Is it a different condition that I don't know about? And the idea that your situation is quite different from other people's, but it is actually that questioning and that anxiety and that like, oh, what if it's something else, that actually can keep you awake.
Yes, I think you said it so well. I think that was like the biggest point here, actually. You summarized it really well. And I just want to add to that, like, the question of, is this sleep apnea? And then it becomes like, if it is, what do I have to do? Do I have to wear a mask the rest of my life? And that, of course, creates a lot of anxiety in itself. But, again, not to give any medical advice here, talk to your doctor about whatever is right for you. But sleep apnea is quite straightforward. It's somebody who's like typically a little bit heavy set, snores a lot, stops breathing during sleep. But even people with sleep apnea, their sleep is disrupted, but there's no real anxiety around. It's like, I wake up 4 times a night because I'm choking and it sucks, but and I feel sleepy, but there's no like pondering and wondering and trying to figure out, is it this, is it that? So to me, like when when you're really wondering, trying to figure out, like projecting, forecasting, predicting, that tells you a lot about what's driving the trouble sleeping, I think. And like, should you do a test or not? Again, that's nothing we can answer here, but I guess the question becomes, if you do a test and then it comes back like you don't have sleep apnea, will that lead to a place where you feel, okay, good, it's not that, I'm all set? Or does it lead to maybe they missed something, maybe I should do some other test, that type of thing? What do you think, Laura?
Well, yeah, and that falls back into the like, oh, I just want to forget about this, or I don't want to think about it, or I just want to move on from it. It does suggest there's a little bit of like, and I totally understand this. It's kind of like you just want to be better and be sleeping well. And when you've had experiences of that, you're like, yep, okay, now I can just let go of this. And I think the forget it part of your title of the book is more about like, to do with the actual sleep, like the timeless sleep window. So like setting that time and then not having to think about it so much. I don't think it's about forgetting about that you had insomnia at all. Like for me, it was like a very big experience. And yes, because I'm not experiencing it at the moment, I don't talk about it that much, but it was a really formative like experience. I haven't just like forgotten about it, and I don't think I want to, because it taught me so much about myself and my relationship with anxiety and sense of self. So I don't know if being inverted commas cured of insomnia means that you forget about it. And I don't know if that's the process, because you have to sort of face it and know that it's there, but know that it doesn't have a big impact on you. If you have a couple of nights of poor sleep, you kind of know how to manage that and how not to, that it doesn't really infect your life. The other thing that I just remember is you saying that you were experiencing tiredness throughout the day. And I think that might be more to do with the struggle and the worry than the not sleeping, because it's often the struggling and the fighting against insomnia and all of this kind of questioning that happens, As I said, like I remember looking up all these articles around wisdom teeth surgery and, in the middle of the night. And that's the stuff that like can really make you tired the next day.
100%. So well said. And I'm just going to sneak in this last. This is kind of like a not really, what do you call it? I'm planning to make a video with this with actually somebody named Alina who kind of presented this like idea, but she talked of it as like, have you seen The Matrix, that movie?
Oh, a long time ago.
Do you remember kind of the thing? Not much,
I remember Keanu Reeves. That's about it.
Yeah. He's in there. Well, anyway, so for those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically the idea is like we live in this future where actually like these like computers have taken over the world and they still need humans. So we're kind of like bred into these kind of like we're lying in these machines, and they're connected to our brains and they take our energy or something like that. But they project this idea in our head. So we think we're in the natural world, but actually like the real world doesn't exist. Something like that's the Matrix, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's this moment where like Neo, who's kind of a head, Keanu Reeves, his character is presented with like the blue pill or the red pill. And basically if he takes the blue pill, then he will just forget about everything and go back into the Matrix, not know anything. And if he takes the red pill, then he will kind of like learn everything and understand it. And Ali, who brought this up, she said that it's kind of like you kind of have to take the red pill, because in reality, there is no blue pill. Even if you want to take the blue pill, forget about everything. Like, it's not possible. You can't do that. So you kind of have to take the red pill and like go inside, understand yourself, understand the mind. But the beauty of that becomes that when you've seen the Matrix, you realize that the insomnia matrix is not the only one, right? There are other areas, like we have anxiety, we have like, anger issues or whatever it is. Like we want to stop all kinds of things. When we see that, I'm approaching these other parts of my life in the same way. I try to control it when I actually can't control this. Then my point is that when you've taken that journey, it can actually be something that helps you in other parts of life. So for somebody like Reine, who raised this message, if you move away from like, I want to forget about this whole thing to like, I want to understand it, it can actually be really helpful, right?
Yeah, totally. And the other thing that's a really important piece, and I think I mentioned this in my last video, is like understanding it with self-compassion, because what you're experiencing is difficult. It is really hard being tired during the day. It is a really like painful experience, and it really had an impact on my relationships and my family. Like it can filter into everything, especially when you're in the midst of it. So it's like trying to have this understanding of yourself, but from a really gentle and kind place, not like I must figure this out so that I can fix myself, because that in itself is not I think if you can approach it with a kindness and gentleness, and spending the time when you're awake doing things that you enjoy, or speaking to yourself with kindness when you might be struggling during the day with like you're having problems with memory, or just that sort of fatigue, is just trying to be really kind. I remember telling Daniel on the days where there was a couple of days, because I worked in a place where I felt like I wasn't safe to use machinery, so I would sometimes take days off, but I would go to the movies, and because it was air conditioned, and I would be, instead of giving myself a hard time because I didn't make it to work, I'd be like, well, I'm just going to watch a movie it was very hot during the summer when I was experiencing it. So that's the other piece I think.
100%. I think that's self-kindness. Nothing is more important. So, perfect. We'll end on that note. And Laura, I'll say thanks so much for coming on. It's like
that's all right. No worries.
So helpful. So I'll just say thank you and be in touch. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.